Beautiful Together, an organization that we founded about 3 years ago. We do the bulk of our work focused on supporting children waiting for families and those living in extreme poverty. For the most part, most of our work has been in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, which is where this was shot. And we've also done work in the United States as well as ongoing work in Syria, supporting children living in refugee camps. But the focus, like I said, is mostly in orphanages, care centers, foster care, and impoverished communities, where about 150 million orphans, estimated around the world, live. And rooms like this in inner city Addis Ababa, where there's just rows and rows of cribs, and the children grow up in a way where they do not really belong to anyone, which is kind of a nutty concept if you think about it. When I consider the fact that we spent about a week, about 12 years ago, we spent 1 week in an orphanage bringing home our baby son from Ethiopia, was able to visit a couple other centers, and then spent 2 months in Ecuador bringing home our then 3.5-year-old daughter. I really got a sense of what it means, how we don't even consider the luxury of being born into family. And these children that we meet and that we get to know, you realize that they connect in a way not only to you but to each other in the way they best can, to their caregivers if they have them. And when we see them, we thought, how can we make a difference in their lives just doing something small, measurable, and impactful? So I love this shot because it's kind of a perfect example of how we are all so very different, no matter what our life experience is. While in these orphanages, we started seeing things that we could change. And we realized that we could pull together some funds, take some photographs, tell some stories, and get started on projects. The very first one we ever did was, can everybody guess what this is? Anybody got a guess? Yes? Yes, it's a toilet. This was an example of a toilet we tore out of a bathroom in Ethiopia, where the children were living, about 65 children living in one orphanage with 2 sets of bathrooms. And they're just dilapidated fixtures, rusted. They would put their hands in a barrel of water to wash them, no soap. Rather unhygienic situation that was dangerous in many ways. So we started taking photographs of the existing situation. We shared the story, and we were able to raise $7,200 US, which is all it took to renovate both of these bathrooms in full. And we raised that by not just sharing the stories, but by connecting with people who cared about these children they would probably never, ever meet, enough to say, okay, I want to donate, I want to share your story, and I want to make a difference too. So we were able to give them all new toilets and showers and cleaned up walls and fixing leaky pipes and sinks with running water that run most of the time, but not always in Africa. We also started working in Korah, a village outside of Addis Ababa. If you look at this photograph, what you see is that Korah was, it's about 2.5 square miles or so, and about 130,000 people live there, and it was built around a trash dump. If you see the individual in this photograph, he is gathering up what he can to sell scraps for not only to make money, but also to try to find food. And this is a lot of how people in Korah live in this type of situation. And while we were there, we learned about things like it used to be a leper colony. Korah was built as a leper colony where these outcasts, these social outcasts, would go and basically build their homes from muds and sticks and build their communities together. And what was so fascinating about meeting these individuals is realizing that their health notwithstanding, they grew older with grace, and they developed really strong connections with people in their community. And they were very fascinating to speak to through translators. And I didn't even know, I was quite ill-informed about leprosy. I thought it had gone away after biblical times. Did anybody else think it still existed in the world? It quite does. And what's interesting to see is that when you visit with people in these communities, that they're cared for by those around them who bring them food, water, who deeply respect not only how they live now, but what they've lived through. The other thing about Korah is that whether they're young children or old children, they invite you into their homes, They welcome you with hugs and kindness and a lot of running up and holding hands. And there's something about that community that really sticks out to you. So we want to do a lot of work in this community. We started by recognizing, I think, the most powerful thing of all. Mike had mentioned that I've been photographing children. I've been specialized in photographing children for 15 years. And in that time, what I've recognized is it does not matter if a kid is growing up in a mansion, or if they're growing up on the streets, or they're living on a neighbor's floor, or they're in a middle-class suburb. They're all kind of the same. They laugh and they cry and they sing and they dance and they're curious and they're silly, and most of them are incredibly full of this vibrancy that you can reach out to and interact with. And once we kind of connected with that, we realized there's a lot we could do in this community. We started by working with a existing grassroots feeding program where these children, I think at the time they could invite in 15 children, where people in the community would cook for them on hot pots on the floor. They would have it one Wednesday a week. These children who were selected, and they were able to verify that they were indeed in need of food, like most are. And they not only brought out the food to them to make sure that they ate, but they also tried to invite more and more kids into the program. What's heartbreaking about this situation is how many children waited outside of the feeding program, who could not come into the feeding program. And it's interesting because you hear the term, I think in the news a lot, you hear the term starving children kind of thrown out there offhand, but the actual physical reality of the pain and the suffering and the difficulty of it is very striking. So we took these photographs, we shared them. We shared the stories of mothers who could not feed their children as much as they wanted to. And it doesn't matter, mother, child, parent, doesn't matter what age, what country, it's mind-boggling to think about people having to suffer in that way. And we thought, how do we build this into a bigger, focused operation? So we started with, over here, a typical setup for a kitchen in Ethiopia where you're trying to feed multiple children. And if you see right there, it's hot pot on the ground. There is, if they can get bottled water, that is great. Quite flammable wall coverings up against the wall. And we shared the story and called it an orphan, basically it was a orphan feeding kitchen that we wanted to build. And we not only got a significant amount of support by individuals, but we also got some donations from the Soul Society. Did anybody hear them speak this morning? You heard them speak? They are a nonprofit started by Jerry and Melissa Guiones, who are also Nikon ambassadors. And what's been pretty amazing is that we have actually been able to kind of share the work we do. It's kind of amazing what you can get done when you don't care about the credit. And they have given to us, and we've been able to give back to other charities. We were able to grow this program. And one of the things I think that maybe we've all experienced here is those situations where something occurs and it's burned into your brain. Can you think of something like what seemed to be a chance situation that stuck with you in a way that made you really want to take action? We met this little boy, Abel, when the feeding kitchen became expanded. And what happens in these situations is the kids come in, they sit down, volunteers in the village come out and bring them plates of food. They eat the food, they enjoy it, they try to talk to them about lessons and values and morals, because these children are orphaned and often being cared for by members of the community. And this little boy was new to the program. He just came in, this little child in oversized clothing. He sat down, he took his plate of food, and he ate all he could that day. And then everyone came around to pick up the plates, and he was not going to let go of his. And he just sat there and held on to his plate. And so I thought, okay, I was taking photographs, I was trying to put this story together. So I sat down next to him and kneeled right in his periphery, thinking, you can't not look at me, I'm right in front of you. But he would not make eye contact, and he just kept clutching that plate. And there's something about that moment that made me think, as hard as this can be, this work to do, it's 100% volunteer. We go back, I think it's been 7 times back and forth to Ethiopia. If you've ever done work like this, you feel like you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back every time. I keep thinking about him and how significant that is. Because these kids stick with you. You learn their quirks, and you get their hugs and their sad goodbyes, and it means something. So in the time span that we've been working, we have been able to not only support this orphanage here, it's called Kadain Maret in Addis Ababa, but we've done a number of other projects. And every single project we did started with, here's the situation, here's what we see. I feel completely helpless to do anything about it because it seems overwhelming and kind of a stunning amount of something. I don't even know how to start. And like, well, what's the first thing we can do? So in the case of working in an orphanage, one of the first things we found is if you stand outside in the courtyard, it's an inner city orphanage and they're trying to play with balls and play basketball and soccer. And every time they kick a ball, it goes out, down the street and into where a bunch of cars are flying back and forth. And it's crazy dangerous. And you have situations like this. If you look over here on the left with this little guy, you have where all the laundry is being hung because everyone's washing laundry all day long. The caregivers, that is a full-time job. It's constant laundry, morning till night. And then on the right is where they play with the balls. So not only would they run into the street after these balls that they're playing with, but they would also kick them into the poor caregivers' heads while they're hanging laundry. And it was actually a dangerous situation all the way around. So we were able to put together the story, share it on social media, and crowdfund an entire kind of fenced-in playing area where they could be safe and they could actually entertain themselves. Because when they're not safe outside and there's no caregivers, it just means they don't get to play. It means they're locked inside and that's where they stay. And so just being able to create an environment where they can do this made a big difference. The other thing that we found working in this orphanage is that there are these really dark on-site classrooms where you can barely see. If you creak the door open, you can barely see the chalkboard in the middle of the day. And the thought was, well, what can we do about that? And we looked at the idea of solar lights. I know nothing about solar lighting whatsoever. I just went on Google and said, what is solar lighting? But we ended up finding out that you don't need much. It's something like $2,500 to get an entire solar panel up on top of this strip of buildings to light these classrooms. And we were able to get lamps also and put them inside the orphanage as well. So it ended up being like Project Flummox as to how to affect any change. Started taking photographs, told the story, got other people to care just as much as we did, and we were able to complete the project. Outside of actually those things, we did something that I would love to see as many photographers who are interested in doing do, which was we created portrait galleries inside the orphanage. So when I say we photographed, the first time I did it, it was 65 children, and it was in the midst of the chaos that is an orphanage. So there are no like, let me put you on this backdrop, let me tuck you in a studio. There's one camera, one lens, and you're basically trying to move around the chaos that is existing. So this is a look at how I photographed our first one of 65 children. You see that? This is the nun who helps run the whole place. We are basically not only taking their photographs, but we're trying to find any spot that we can that is away from all the other kids. Cleaning, so much wiping, so much nose snot cleaning. Teaching others how to take photographs that can help, looking at the entire scene and saying, what's a clean forward and backdrop, like foreground and backdrop, where I can take this picture? Who can help me? Who can run in and adjust something as needed? Obviously, showing them the photographs goes a long way, not just because they're excited to see their photograph, but they get an idea of what I'm going for as we're taking the pictures. The other thing, I think, working with the tween girls, they love the idea of looking like this, of being able to be styled and fashioned. We found the best clothes in the orphanage. They all share clothing to dress everybody up for the shoots, working to get expressions however possible, often very fun, and try to protect the gear because everyone wants to come and take it or smudge it or lick the lenses. That is a perfect example right there. That is what you're shooting through most of the time. And we ended up, I think when all was said and done, I photographed 65 portraits and then another 62, I think, altogether, by doing 2 different portrait galleries in the orphanage. But while you're shooting through all this, you're getting this. You're saying, okay, let me set my shutter speed so the second you fly by, I've got this 1/3000th of a second or whatever it is. You're looking for elements around the space that actually complement the individual as best as possible. You're showing off the ridiculously sweet and cute and funny personalities of these children. And then you're posing them in a way that not only you take these photographs, but they can actually take these photographs to share with prospective families. That was a big part of all of it. And overall, what the point, I think, of this entire gallery was, what I would like to do again and again, and I'd love to talk to anybody else who's interested in doing something like this to give an overview of how to get started, is to say these aren't 65, 85, 120 kids living in a care center, an orphanage, a foster or a group home or anything. These are this soul and this spirit and this individual, and literally pulling them apart and getting those photographs so they're all represented individually, because that is who they are. When we put together the first gallery show, I call this my favorite gallery opening ever, because I had thought, we were flying out of Ethiopia that night, the very first gallery we put up, and I had thought, you know what, it was hard enough to figure out how to even print these images here. We had to double laminate them and stick them to the walls because they couldn't fall on the children. We couldn't frame them. There's 8 caregivers for about 74 kids at that point. And so it's not like anyone's going to monitor and make sure they're safe. We knew that they would be trying to grab them, so we had to put some sort of, proofing on the front of it. And we thought, we'll just get this up. It'll take an hour or so, and then we've got to head out. It ended up taking about 6 hours to get this up, and every single time we pulled a print out of the box, the person next to us would run and scream and get the next kid, and then they'd come over, and then suddenly all the kids everywhere were in this hallway as we were putting up image after image, and the glee and the spirit and the fact that, I don't know how long you guys have been taking photographs, but one of the toughest things about taking photographs is people looking at an image where you're like, you look amazing. And they look at the photograph and like, my arms are too big. And you're like, no, you look amazing. In this situation, every time we showed a portrait to a child, they were like, I look amazing. Which is true. Because even though anywhere you go around the world, people have mobile devices and they take pictures and they get to see their photographs on the back of screens here and there as visitors come through, it's quite different to see a portrait of yourself. To see a portrait that was shot with care, with technical settings all dialed in, that was lit, and you're a larger kind of image on there. This boy on the left, he had very tough time with his vision. Every time I took a photograph on the camera, he would follow me around. I was taking all the photographs, and he'd want to see every one. And he would hold the camera up to his eyes and look up and down this close on the screen to try to get a sense of it. So when I handed him this, he could actually hold it back a little bit and see the whole thing. And it struck me that I didn't expect that. And that was one of the more compelling experiences I had, that he could actually see himself very well. I think the other part of this, the reason why I think these galleries matter and that it's something we could all do if people are interested, is because when you're growing up in an institution that may be the only home you ever know, and you're up against statistics like there's 150 million orphans in the world, and when they age out, it's not like things get better. You age out of an orphanage sometimes as early as 14, 15, 16, and you're in a third world country many times, and you're basically facing statistics that are startling in terms of how you survive by yourself. So if you're growing up in an environment where you're in an institution, it's the only home you know, wouldn't it be great to see yourself everywhere, to be able to see how much you matter and how valued you are? And that's everyone. This is Elsa. I was fortunate enough to meet Elsa for the first time about 3 years ago, and she was born with a condition called hydrocephalus, which when treated by great medical care is treatable. You can go on to live a long life. But if you do not have access to good medical care, it is debilitating. And so she was what all the caregivers called the angel. She had just the gentlest, sweetest personality, and everyone who came and visited, the caregivers would introduce them to Elsa because she stayed in that situation. And so when I photographed her, I took a series of photographs, and we picked out her favorite, and we put that in a position where she could see it, and then we left, and then we came back, and we left, and we came back. And on our last visit back, we learned that she had passed away since the last time we left. But they still have the portrait, and the caregiver who told me this said that every time she comes into work, she walks over and she kisses the portrait. And to me, that's just the the power that we have as photographers to keep something around forever, regardless of what an individual's life situation is or how short they are here. I mentioned earlier that we work with other nonprofits. One of the nonprofits that I have had the pleasure of working with is called Make Your Mark. They're in Ethiopia, and their focus is to bring homeless kids off the streets. And when I say kids, I mean ages 10 to 14, mostly boys, living in basically large groups where they'll huddle together for warmth, and they live on the streets. And the goal is to get them to transition into a safer environment where they can go to school and get regular meals and access to healthcare, which keeps coming up and up again. And when we went out on this morning, it was 4:30 in the morning. It was pitch dark. I'm shooting this at like 25,000 ISO. Thank you, Nikon, for making that possible. And because you can't use ambient light, you can't use any sort of light that's going to distract the actual experience from occurring and make it into something artificial. But the thing that struck me when we saw them is that they're sleeping inches from cars racing past their head. This is a very busy road section. They're on a median, and they're outside the bridge. And I didn't understand why, and I learned later that if they had moved under the bridge, they were extremely likely to be assaulted or attacked. Everything taken from them. They almost can't keep shoes because shoes are all of them. So we met the children, and I kind of followed along what they do. They take them out to breakfast, they build connections, they come back and visit again and again, and slowly over time they try to bring them into this program. When they can bring them into the program, the transformation is unbelievable. It's unbelievable because suddenly they're healthy and they're eating regularly and they are off anything that they were trying to take to survive on the streets. And I mean like sniffing the cheapest glue that's just terrible for your lungs just to try to calm the discomfort and pain of living on the streets as a child. And so when they brought them into this transformational situation, the ones who chose to stay changed their lives. The ones who didn't choose to stay didn't choose because even though the situation they're living in is pretty terrible, it's still something that they at least know, which is a lot of times what people will make those decisions in life. Our latest project, our current project that is not only underway, but we're looking to expand right now, is called the Orphan Prevention Care Center. And what this is trying to look at one of the issues with orphans. Like, why do kids become orphans? Basically, they are orphans because they either never had a family or they lost one. And why would they lose one? A major issue is extreme poverty. So we're looking at mothers who are trying to keep their families together, whether it's parents or just single mothers, and cannot afford to. So they want their child to go somewhere where they can have a better life and they can eat. And in this case, what you see here is a very common sight in Ethiopia, which is women carrying bundles of massive amounts of weights and sticks on their back and walking for miles and miles and miles, and I mean an average of 20 miles over the course of the day with that on your back, because it is a way to make money when you do not have an education past maybe 4th grade, which is an average age of education for women who do not have access to schooling. And so in this situation, what you also see in this photograph is the obvious gap in terms of gender equality, which is another major factor when it comes to extreme poverty and orphans in Ethiopia. So there is either this option or the option to put the baby on your back and go beg, because there's not a child care option available to a lot of impoverished families. And so it's funny, I've traveled before with people who have said, gosh, they put the babies on their back just so they can get some sympathy. Like, well, also, where else are they gonna go? Think about it. What do you do when the only way you make money is to beg? The issue, I think, with having those two as the main options for you isn't that these women can't do other things. It's not that they're not talented and smart and capable. It's that they don't have this access to opportunity. It reminds me of a story once of a man who died, passed away. He was a military aficionado. He knew everything there was to know about the military. Too bad Stacy's not here. And he basically went up to the pearly gates and he said, I've been waiting to ask this question my whole life. I knew as soon as I died, I could ask somebody who knew. Who is the greatest general who ever lived? I've had all these contests with my friends. We can't figure it out. What's the answer? And St. Peter, or whoever guards the gates, looked over and he pointed at a guy and he said his name. And the guy's like, you know what, I've studied everything. I've never heard of him. And he's like, well, he was born to surf. He worked in hard-working jobs his whole life, and he died unknown. But if he'd had access to the opportunity of military training, he would have been the most amazing general the world had ever seen. And that to me is so compelling because these women don't have the access to what they can do to transform their lives and keep their families together. So that's what we wanted to do, is create an opportunity for these women. We have selected 12 women, mothers, all of whom were on the verge of losing their families because of the poverty situation they're under. And look at this woman now, and now. The woman on the left, I'll give you a moment. This is 3 months into the program. They basically, 12 women who've all been vetted, and we were able to verify kind of what their whole life situation is, have our project right now is basically to make sure their kids are in safe situations in terms of childcare, where we're paying nannies to be able to employ them to care for these children, and then having the mothers go through vocational training. In this situation, most of them are taking restaurant classes, so they're learning how to not only prepare food and serve food, but they spend the first few weeks of the program just learning about hygiene and how to dress and how to clean yourself and how to present yourself to others, and things that we would kind of take for granted, but when you don't have the opportunity to learn all that, it's not so simple. They are basically going to go through this program for 12 months, and at the end of 12 months, they're going to walk away with a certificate from the government, which is pretty valuable to them, and that'll allow them to work in any restaurant or hotel or food service organization that they want, and we will be able to help them into those opportunities. So we're going to go from carrying sticks in your back and begging on the streets to being able to maximize your actual potential like you should, and keep your families together. So this is the program we're looking to expand. I think overall, that's a lot that I covered. I think I didn't even bring up about 8 or 9 of our projects. If you're interested, you can go to beautifultogether.org to see more of them. But what I feel at the end of 3+ years of working on, I think we've got 13 projects and 4 funds under our belt, is mostly like, God, have we even made a dent? Like, I want to sit here and say, I feel amazing, we've done it all. I know some things that we've seen to fruition. I know there's been changes, but you kind of look at these kids and you walk in and say, there's more children now than there were when we started in these orphanages we go back to every time. I don't even know how to face the overwhelming nature of extreme poverty, but we can start with this project, work from it start to finish, do the next one, and do the next one. And hopefully, along the way, with every child we interact with, make sure that they know exactly how much they're loved, valued, and how significant they are, not only to us, but to the world. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website, beautifultogether.org, or you can reach out on social media. I'd love to talk to you if you have any interest in not only this, but doing these kind of projects yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tamara, Lackey, thank you so much. An amazing program. We've got one more program to close out the day here at the Nikon Theater, so stick around. We will talk about sports, portraits, rock and rolls, and the power of portraits to make a difference at the Ronald McDonald House of Long Island, right here at the Nikon Theater at 5 p.m.